Hello and welcome everybody. This is Donald Dare, Chief Executive Officer of the Pan-African Lawyers Union, joining you from our Secretariat in Arusha in the lovely United Republic of Tanzania. We'd like to welcome each and every one of you to our first virtual event of the year. We promise that there will be many more virtual events, and hopefully, should COVID-19 and our response to it allow, even physical events in the course of the year. We thank you for being on time and apologize for starting a bit late. Before we get into the formal program, let me go into some logistical announcements. First, simultaneous interpretation. This conference is being relayed in 4 languages, in Arabic, English, French, and Portuguese. If you go to the bottom of your screen, in case it's your first time, at the bottom right of your screen, not far from the red button for leave, you will find the interpretation icon. If you click on it, you're able to choose which language option you want, whether Arabic, English, French, or Portuguese. And then you can also mute the original audio so that it does not disturb you depending on the language that the main speaker is speaking on. We also request that in your attendee list, you try and identify yourself by name. Please go and write your correct name, like mine is Donald Dare. So please don't leave yourself as iPhone 6 user or Android user or other nicknames. We're sure that your fellow participants would like to interact with you. So if it is not properly named, you can go again to the icon against your participation, double click on it, and it will allow you to change the name so you're able to write your name. We encourage you that we want these 3 days to be very, very interactive. Not everybody's audio can be heard, but everybody's input can be heard or read or seen. So please use the chat function very robustly. You can start by going now. Please tell us your name and tell us where you're joining us from. Just type there, my name is X, I'm joining you from Y city in Z country. Please do that. And we encourage you throughout the 3 days, use the chat very much. Put examples, put insights, put stories. If you have questions, then please use the question and answer function, the Q&A function. But for all other comments and insights and experiences and on, use the chat function. And do remember to mute yourself at all times, your audio at all times, unless you've been given the permission to speak by the session chairperson or the moderator. We are also live on social media. You can find us on our YouTube pages, on Facebook, on Twitter, all of them, it's at African Lawyers, My Secretary General, Kali Abdul-Bagi, who was meant to conduct this part of the session, unfortunately is having internet challenges in Yaoundé in Cameroon. So I'll just run through quickly for him and then hand over to our President, Chief Emeka Obegolu, who is already on the call. So one thing I'd like to do is to give some gratitude to our sponsors and our partners. And we take this opportunity to thank various partners and donors who have partnered with us in this conference and who otherwise support the work of PALU throughout the year, the work we do with our members, both our individual and our institutional members, and the work that we do in the public interest. Not everybody can be named, but let me at least name the following. First, Lawyers Hub, which is our technical and strategic partner in the hosting of this virtual conference. It's a group of lawyers and other technology enthusiasts, a diverse group that operate out of Nairobi, Kenya, and have been a very useful partner to us in the legal profession during this period of COVID-19, helping us to learn what are the latest technologies, what are the best technologies, how we can quickly innovate to survive and to thrive in the environment that we find ourselves in. I'll mention a few others in alphabetical order. One, Facebook Africa, which has sponsored a session in this conference. and has also committed to generally working with African lawyers more. Then GIZ, the German Institute for International Development Cooperation, especially through its regional project on promotion of the rule of law and justice in Africa. They've also supported some of our programming and some of our work. I'd like to mention very especially the Institute for African Women in Law, who we recently signed a comprehensive memorandum of understanding on cooperation and collaboration with, so that we can work very, very resolutely together, especially in raising the status of female members of the legal and judicial profession in our continent, and also the state of women, gender equality, and women's empowerment in our societies. I would also like to mention the International Center for Not-for-Profit Law, ICNL, which is also a programming partner, especially on issues of constitutionalism, rule of law, good governance, protection and promotion of civic space on our continent, and also supports PALU financially. The Law Society of England and Wales also has a long-standing collaboration with PALU, the Pan-African Lawyers Union, where we partner in capacity building, and they've been very useful in building the capacity, especially in membership services of myself and of my team. And we also partner with them on issues of independence of the legal profession and gender equality within the legal profession. Law Trailer, Abuja-based Law Trailer, which is a law tech company that has also sponsored a session, and we will be hearing from them tomorrow, especially around innovations and legal technology generally, and especially in the field of continuing legal education, continuing professional development. Then I'd also like to mention the Open Society Foundations, who work extremely comprehensively with us on a range of things across the continent and globally, from issues of African unity, continental integration, regional integration, rule of law, international justice, and so on. And finally, and not least, the Raoul Wallenberg Institute for Human Rights and Humanitarian Law, with whom we also work quite closely on issues of human and people's rights, including strengthening Pan-African international institutions, including our international courts and tribunals, and with whom we also engage on issues of implementation of the decisions coming from international courts and tribunals and gender equality within the African human rights and legal system. So I'll spare you a detailed rundown of the sessions of the conference. As you might know, we will have 6 sessions in total, starting with this one, which is the opening roundtable, and is themed on the theme of the conference, which is COVID-19 and after, an agenda for the legal profession in Africa, and of course, how we engage in the rest of the world. I will not speak much about that because my president will shortly do so when he introduces that particular session. Thereafter, later this afternoon, we'll have a session on women in leadership in the legal profession in Africa, where we'll have, in the legal profession in Africa, where we'll have a sitting president of a law society, Professor John Padauni, who has done immense research on women and law in Africa generally, and a comparative from our colleague from the Law Society of England and Wales, that's Ms. Lisette Robleto de Haworth, who is the International Programs Manager. Tomorrow, same time, we will have 2 sessions. The first one will be gender mainstreaming in regional courts and tribunals in Africa. So we'll be focusing on the courts and tribunals specifically. And that session will be led by our treasurer, Ms. Gigi Reed-Miles. And that will be followed by the session I've already talked about on legal tech, and especially in the context of continuing legal education in Africa. And that will be led by our colleague, Naro Omosaje, who manages Law Trailer, and also practices in the law firm, the Abuja-based law firm, A&D Law Partnership, as the head of their digital law and policy practice. We will then have later in the evening a networking fun session themed on the theme of the day, the International Day of Privacy. So we'll have a quiz and lots of other activities where we can just meet virtually, informally, by way of a quiz night and just kind of interact, get to hear more voices, people introduce themselves to each other, and so on. Then on Friday, the final day of our 3-day conference, we will have our first session on the role of lawyers in protecting constitutionalism and civic space in the time of COVID-19 in Africa. As you may know, the last election we've just gotten out of in Africa is election in the Republic of Uganda. Shortly before that, there were elections in the United
Dernière élection que nous avons.
And before that, in a number of other countries, Guinea, Niger, and so on.
Il y a aussi d'autres pays tels que le Niger
some of the challenges that we're facing
vont aussi
with rule of law and how unscrupulous people can take advantage of COVID-19 to roll back on our rights. So in that one will be chaired, the session will be led by a colleague, practicing advocate from the Democratic Republic of Congo, Ms. Nereye Kiyoka, an active member of PALU. Our final session will be a very interesting one on restitution of African heritage from American and European capture. So we'll have a conversation with lawyers and other actors on how we can get back African arts, African crafts, African cultural paraphernalia, even African bodies that either in the process of slavery or colonialism or thereafter have been illicitly gotten from our continent. And we'll actually hear from even colleagues who are beginning to litigate in our courts and international
Comment on a pu profiter de notre continent?
And then we'll have a closing, again, networking and fun.
Il y aura aussi une session finale sur le réseautage. Je vais faire quelques remarques au nom du secrétaire. En 2020, nous avons connu une
continued our journey of professionalizing and improving our programs and projects and our services to our members in line with our strategic objectives, the broadest of which is to build a stronger, more unified legal profession in Africa. We will continue this trend. Tomorrow, on Friday, we will be launching our new membership engagement system, which some of you have already been using, which completely digitizes the membership experience in PALU. We have already also upgraded our website to make it more dynamic, have more information in English and French for now, and later in Arabic, and in Portuguese as well. So there's a lot, and we hope that we take these 3 days to be able to discuss them. As I say, visit our social media pages on Facebook, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on YouTube. Also visit our website. Engage us in the chat box. Our colleagues on standby to answer any question you may have, and of course our panelists too. And with that, please now let me invite the President of PALU, Chief Emeka Obegolu, FCIR, who's joining us from his chambers in Abuja in Nigeria. Welcome, Mr. President. I don't think you've been unmuted yet. Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you very much, Don. Let me, on behalf of the Pan-African Lawyers Union, welcome our participants to this session of the first virtual conference of PALU for the year 2021. Of course, Don has introduced PALU for who we are. That's for me as chair of the session to restate the objective of this high-level roundtable. For us as Pan-African Lawyers Union, the main objectives of this roundtable are first, one, to rekindle the spirit of friendship and partnership between African lawyers and the National Lawyers Association in which we associate. And this includes we have the Commonwealth Lawyers Association, the CIB, the International Bar Association, of course, Pan-African Lawyers Union, and the UIA, which is the African lawyers of the Francophone speaking countries. In broad strokes, we have to reflect on the past year and share ideas and agendas that these key international lawyers associations will pursue in this new year. Specifically, I think we need to distill and showcase any best practices emerging from the legal profession in the era of COVID-19. This includes developments at the national levels for individual lawyers, innovations by law firms and other legal sector institutions, and of course, initiatives by lawyers associations. We will continue this discussion on the importance of redressing gender inequalities in leadership of bar associations, law societies, law firms, in-house functions, and other players in the legal sector. Of course, most of us know that PALU is an equal opportunity association. We take gender balancing very seriously, and this, of course, is reflected, as we can say, on the panelists for all the sessions for this conference. Again, let me place on record the apologies we received from some of the panelists who were billed to participate in this session. The first is the African president of the International Bar Association, Mr. Stanford Moyo. He is not unable to come due to personal reasons, but he has committed with Ms. Samaile Kiingi, who is the Director and General Counsel, Africa Export-Import Bank. She suffered a bereavement of an office colleague and, of course, is attending to the necessary formalities. Both of them extend their apologies and they proffer their solidarity to PALU and, of course, with the African lawyers. And they give their commitment to join PALU in all our future events in the course of the year. So who do we have present? Presently, we have Ms. Linda Kasundi, Mr. Stephen Boabeng Baidu, and Ms. Wechia Kile. Further down the program, we'll fully introduce these panelists. But again, let's start by framing the session for us so that we can all key in. Starting in early 2020, the severe acute respiratory syndrome, otherwise called coronavirus, often referred to as COVID-19, wreaked havoc on the world societies, polities, and economies. Of course, we know that it brought about the virtues of sheer grit, resilience, proactiveness, dynamism, and creativity of many individuals, institutions, public and private, including law firms, and many of our governments and intergovernmental agencies. Or as these institutions and individuals struggle to come to terms with the contours of this new virus, they also strived to put in place proactive measures against it, while finding new ways or even older ways that we had abandoned of coping and of protecting and providing for themselves, their loved ones, their communities, and their nations at large. The legal profession was part of these endeavors at individual, law firm, and of course, associational level. Together with our judiciaries, we explored ways of keeping courts, registries, and other government agencies, whether fiscally, but with proactive measures or virtually. Now, in addition to the judiciary, we also engineered our law firms and other institutions to be able to work and collaborate remotely. For those of us who practice alternative dispute resolution, we also engineered ways to enhance online dispute resolution to create platforms for dispute resolution in a private and, of course, confidential manner. We engaged the three key arms of government, the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary, in passing or amending laws, rules, regulations, and procedures to facilitate these new ways of living, socializing, and most importantly, working. We engaged and confronted government that exploited our dire circumstances to roll back on gains in democratic governance, the rule of law, and human and people's rights. This work continues as we settle into the new year, and it's a challenge to all of us to be on the watch out. It is with the above in mind that the leadership of PALU has set aside some time for reflection on our profession's experiences and its contributions as we bid farewell to 2020. And to begin to draw a proactive agenda for the new year 2021, we have picked some themes which we have been working on and will continue to work in the new year. And we wish to engage our members, friends, and stakeholders to share information, insights, and generate new ideas and commitments to excelling in them. In the course of the year, besides other commitments and webinars that we will host, we will convene our 2021 annual conference and general meeting to report on this implementation and move forward with the continuous mandate of upholding the highest standards for the legal profession in Africa and harmonize the legal profession in the interest of justice and for the benefits of citizens of Africa. We will now invite our panelists to make their introductory remarks, but before then, let me do a short bio or profile of our panelists in no particular order. The first is Ms. Linda Kasundi. Linda is a lawyer and a civil rights activist. She obtained an LLB law degree from the University of Leicester in England in 2000, and LLM law degree from the University of Cape Town in 2007. Linda was admitted to the Zambian bar in 2001. In 2014, she became the first female partner in an established and internationally recognized Zambian law firm to be elevated to the position of named partner when the firm became known as Bulenga Mudanshi Kasundi Legal Practitioners, MMK. She is the first woman to be elected as president of the Law Society of Zambia in the history of the association in Zambia, pre or post-independence in 1964. She is currently the owner and founder of the law firm LCK Chambers, a dispute resolution and corporate advisory practice which runs as a social enterprise as a sustainability measure for Chapter 1 Foundation. In April 2019, Linda was elected as the Vice President for Africa for the Commonwealth Lawyers Association, the first Zambian to hold that position. Linda is a member of the advisory board of the Africa Regional Forum for the International Bar Association. She is currently the chairperson of the University of Zambia's Staff Tribunal and formerly a member of the inaugural Competition and Consumer Protection Tribunal. Thank you, Linda. Now we have a second panelist, Stephen Bubeng Bedu. Stephen is a legal expert in international human rights and public international law, focusing on African Union law. He's a graduate of the Center for Human Rights, University of Pretoria. He has served several years of experience working as a legal assistant at the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, where he was primarily tasked with the task of assisting in the handling of its protection mandate, including drafting of judgments on contentious cases. Stephen currently serves as a legal associate at the Office of the Legal Counsel, African Union, offering legal advice on a wide range of AU-specific issues, while also serving as a member of its treaty development team. The last but not the least is Ms. Wachia Kilel. Ms. Kilel is currently legal specialist at the International Development Law Organization, IDLO. She holds a Bachelor of Laws degree from the University of Nairobi and a Master of Laws in Financial Laws and Regulations from Strathmore University, also in Nairobi. She has previously worked as senior case counsel at the Nairobi Center for International Arbitration, and before that, as a senior state counsel in the State Law Office in the Attorney General's Chamber in the Republic of Kenya. Now, for the purpose of commencement of this session, I will invite first to speak Stephen Bubeng Bedu to give us his experience on the theme and subject matter of this session, after which Ms. Wachia Kilel will come in, and then the last speaker will be Linda Kasundi. Now, we have some questions and we'll invite participants. If you have your questions, please post your questions on the chat room where we can take the questions and offer and present to the panelists. You can choose any panelist to direct your question to, or you can also throw in an open question, which of course any of the panelists can take a shot. I have my questions, but I'll allow the three panelists to first take 30 minutes each to speak to the theme of this session from their respective backgrounds. So I invite Stephen Boabeng Bedu to please take the floor. Thank you. Stephen, can you unmute and take the floor, please?
Can I be heard? Yes, I've unmuted. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now, Stephen. Thank you.
Okay, yes. Apologies, I may need to keep my video off. I tried to get to the office, but as we are all aware at this particular stage, that due to the working from home arrangements, sometimes they're a bit difficult to get to work. So I'm essentially streaming from my home or joining this session from home. And so apologies if you will not be able to see me on the video. If we switch the video on, I may not be able to participate effectively. So as has already been introduced, my name is Stephen Boabeng Bedu, a legal associate at the Office of the Legal Counsel. I am here on behalf of the Legal Counsel herself, Ambassador Dr. Namira Ngem, who, as some may know, is presently preoccupied as our Permanent Representatives Committee is meeting virtually today to discuss the day-to-day activities of the African Union. I was a bit shocked when we were told to discuss this for 30 minutes, namely because I was principally told of this event this morning. But nevertheless, I shall attempt to give a brief overview of some of the internal and external measures that have been adopted by the African Union, with a specific focus on the actions taken by the Office of the Legal Counsel to respond to COVID-19. Firstly, I think it is important to give a brief overview of the Office of the Legal Counsel and essentially what our mandate is, so that the attendees and panelists I guess, a bit more clued up as to the role that we were expected to play in this pandemic. So I think as is general knowledge, the African Union is an international organization comprised of 55 member states. It is essentially a creature of the Constitutive Act of the African Union, which was a multilateral treaty which came into force in 2001. Now, the Office of the Legal Counsel, which is situated within the Bureau of the Chairperson of the African Union Commission, has at least 6 central objectives. The first of which is to provide a unified central legal service for the African Union, including all its organs and institutions. To secondly, ensure the decision-making processes are compliant with AU legal frameworks. Thirdly, to provide advice on the interpretation of AU legal instruments. Fourthly, to support the Executive Council and Assembly in conducting elections, a service which was affected by the pandemic, as will be discussed later on. Fifthly, to provide legal advice on cooperation with international or internationalized judicial accountability mechanisms. Furthermore, to provide legal services for special political missions, peacekeeping operations, and other field missions on matters such as diplomatic privileges and immunities and the legal status of the organization. And lastly, to act as the Secretariat of the African Union Commission on International Law, or rather to house the Secretariat of the Commission. So essentially, those are the main functions of the of the Office of the Legal Counsel. Now, when the pandemic came about, there were specific questions that the Office of the Legal Counsel had to ask itself. And I think it's easier to understand these kinds of questions if we contrast it to other organs or other departments of the Union. So we can take, for instance, the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. Having had experience at the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, I'm acutely aware that at the time in which the pandemic hit, the African Commission on Human and People's Rights asked itself a central question. What are the limits of emergency measures that can be adopted by states in curbing the COVID-19 pandemic? i.e., if a state issues a particular lockdown or adopts a particular lockdown measure, how far can that state go before the state can be said to have violated certain human rights? And indeed, we could see that that at least at the outset of the pandemic, there were several states whereby the policing measures or the security measures adopted by the states in response to COVID-19 was in fact taking more lives than the pandemic itself. And so essentially, an institution like the African Commission on Human and People's Rights has to consider the weighing of rights or the weighing of interests whenever a state of emergency is declared or occurs in a particular territory or in the world. The Office of the Legal Counsel has to consider far more administrative issues, which are not, dare we say, as lofty or as philosophical. A simple question is this: if a staff member is due to resign from the union, but is unable to effectively resign as a result of border closures in response to COVID-19, what are the legal obligations that the union has with respect to that staff member? And what provisions exist to regulate said situations? And so we find that at the outset, the African Union recognized that most of our instruments, including the staff rules and regulations, the financial rules and regulations, and other instruments, don't actually make provision for emergency situations of this nature. Usually, the emergency provisions which are provided for and which are envisioned relate to emergency evacuations as a result of an outbreak of conflict in a particular country. And this is as a result of our experiences. And so because essentially no one in the world has any experience with the shutting down of the world as a result of a virus, we found that most of our instruments were incapable of addressing both the internal and external issues arising out of the COVID-19 pandemic. And we developed one central response, at least internally, to address the continuation of work and to ensure that there is some output, notwithstanding the various lockdowns which had occurred in the world. And so the African Union chairperson, pursuant to the regulations and rules, specifically Rule 7 to 36, 38, 39, and 67 to 71 of the staff regulations and rules, established internal guidelines that outline the principles of continuity in the event of natural, man-made security, biological, and technological threats, including public health emergencies. So the chairperson recognized that there was no need to establish guidelines simply for COVID-19. There was a huge gap in the rules, policies, and regulations at the level of the African Union to deal with public emergencies. And therefore, a general guideline was developed to address all kinds of emergencies, including COVID-19. And these guidelines sought to provide, to guide both the AU organs, AU departments, and divisions in various legal issues. So the first of which dealt with staff performance and the continuity of work. So what measures do we need to put in place to ensure that staff continue to perform? and that there is that work continues. Secondly, it was the issue of security, safety, and quite importantly to judicial and legal organs such as the Office of the Legal Counsel, is the issue of confidentiality of official information and documents. Furthermore, the guidelines address issues relating to annual leave and home leave, and an interesting and innovative development was the development of rest and recuperation leave. So essentially, even though this particular kind of leave is not provided for ordinarily in the staff regulations and rules, as a response to COVID-19, the guidelines sought to create a special kind of leave for a specific category of staff members who could not, due to the nature of their work, effectively work from home. So that's one innovation which was introduced in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Furthermore, it was the issue of recruitment and appointments, as well payment of salaries and allowances, and the renewal of staff contracts. So these guidelines dealt with the very, should we say, very nitty-gritty issues, which may not be particularly high-minded, but are nevertheless equally important. And I will try and speak a little bit about some of the positions adopted in that policy guideline with respect to those various issues. So as regards staff performance and teleworking, as a precautionary measure to mitigate the spread of risks associated with the COVID-19 pandemic, the chairperson commanded all organs of the African Union to institute the possibility of teleworking both at the duty station or outside the duty station, the latter of which would require the permission of a particular director or head of a department. It was determined furthermore that in order to effectively facilitate teleworking, the metric by which we judge staff performance had to change. And so the African Union effectively determined then that staff performance could be appraised on the basis of output and delivery of various activities rather than time-based performance criteria. So ordinarily, individuals would be, or staff would be given tasks and given a particular time within which to address those tasks. In response to the COVID-19 pandemic, staff were given a limited number of tasks and merely told to complete those tasks within a particular period and not necessarily a specific time criteria per se. And we found that by doing this, staff were able to maintain performance levels whilst at the same time decreasing both the physical and mental toll of working from home and working away from your colleagues, from your colleagues. And so we found that adopting teleworking could not work unless we shifted or changed our approach to staff performance and staff appraisal. The second matter that we had to be concerned with were issues of security, safety, and confidentiality of official information and documents. We adopted a measure by which so essentially we adopted online signatures, and staff were expressly required to communicate utilizing official channels. So although this is the rule usually, in many instances, maybe due to internet shortage, as you would know, in Ethiopia, there are times where there's significant shutdowns of internet. There will be times where individuals would use, measures outside of the official channels to communicate with one another. But as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and considering that most of the work occurred online, there was an express obligation on staff members to ensure that they communicate utilizing official channels and that communications have the official signature or authorization of the requisite members before they are published or indeed sent internally. So the union effectively hit down on this obligation of ensuring that information is confidential. So then there were the next issue then addresses the various leaves which were introduced internally. So for instance, we recognize that many people who, as a result of the border closures, could not take annual leave in the strict sense of the term, or home leave in the strict sense of the term. And various provisions were made to ensure that, for instance, we determined that Rules 38, sub-rules 1 and 2 of our rules, which speak to the entitlement to annual leave and set a minimum of 10 working days, which had to be exhausted within a year in order to utilize your annual leave. It was determined that staff could take said leave at their duty stations should borders be closed, and that it would still count towards the usage of their annual leave. A similar provision was made with regards to home leave. We also then determined that there are certain critical staff members, such as those who work at Africa CDC, those who work in our various medical departments, financial, human resources, protocol staff members, who, as a result of the critical nature of their work, could not effectively work from home, and therefore were required to work at the various duty stations. In those instances, there was a requirement that the various organs and departments establish roster systems to ensure that social distance is maintained and that the office isn't essentially inundated with staff members, thereby exacerbating the risk of contracting COVID-19. And as a result of staff members essentially being required to work at the duty station, notwithstanding the COVID-19 pandemic, as indicated earlier, the guidelines introduced rest and recuperation leave, which essentially states that critical staff members who work during this period at the duty stations shall be entitled to be paid rest and recuperation leave of 5 working days every 30 calendar days, irrespective of their contract. So this applies both to short-term staff and as well regular staff. Furthermore, it was determined that these days should not be deducted from staff members' annual leave entitlements. So this is an entirely separate leave regime, which was introduced in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Another problem we had was the issue pertaining to recruitments and appointments. As a result of the pandemic, in many instances, it was quite difficult to onboard new staff. And so a policy was developed to provide that only critical staff could be recruited and onboarded during the period of the pandemic. This is also as a result of the shortfall in the funds of the African Union, as a result of the failure of various states, or I think failure might be a bit of a strong word, the inability of various states to pay their various dues to the African Union as a result of the costs they incurred in addressing the pandemic. So a number of states could not essentially fulfill their dues to the African Union. And this also affected the should we say, the ability of the union to onboard or recruit new staff members and to appoint new staff members as well. So essentially there was a freeze on new appointments, and it was determined that only those critical appointments, essentially those that had already passed particular stages, could go on, notwithstanding the pandemic. Furthermore, we found that due to the, should we say, the remote nature of payment of salaries, there was no real effect on payment of salaries and allowances. And so there were no issues in that respect as regards payment to staff members. However, based on where the staff member was at the time in which a pandemic, at the time in which the pandemic hit and a particular lockdown was required, there were various allowances which said staff members were no longer entitled to. So for instance, if you were entitled to a housing allowance as a result of the fact that you're an international staff, if you had to go home in response to the border closures, you were no longer entitled to said home allowance. And these are some of the kind of legal issues that arise as a result of this pandemic, because you'll have staff members effectively complaining that it is not their fault that they could not report to duty stations. It was mainly a result of the border closures. But nevertheless, this was the policy which was developed by the chairperson, both as a legal measure and also principally as a practical administrative measure due to some of the shortfalls we encountered from the pandemic. Also, one big issue was separation of staff members. So there were various staff members who were stuck at the duty station and could not leave. And the commission determined that based on the particular nature of the staff member, so if you were like a permanent staff member who is effectively resigning, the commission would extend assistance to said staff members for the duration the pandemic, rather the lockdowns continue. One gets the sense that the pandemic doesn't just address very, should we say, lofty issues. There are these employment, labor, and administrative issues that arise from the pandemic, and that the Office of the Legal Counsel had to assist the African Union, to address properly. But outside of the internal arrangements of the African Union, there were various external measures which were taken in response, or rather as regards the relationship of the Union with member states and non-member entities, non-member state entities, such as NHRIs and NGOs, etc. One important development at the level of the African Union, establishment.
Please, can you begin to
Sorry?
Hello, Stephen, please, can you begin to wind down? I'm told we have less than 1 hour to spend with other participants and the panelists. So can you begin to wind down, please?
Okay, no problem. So essentially, some of the external developments that occurred at the level of the African Union pertain to the establishment of a special COVID-19 fund, whereby funds were taken from various departments of the union and put into a fund to assist various member states. I think one thing we've all learned from this experience is that if there isn't some form of coordination between African states, when push comes to shove, we're essentially left on our own. And these are issues we see with the price fixing of COVID-19 vaccines and the likes. But we can say that various organs such as African CDC, the Commission itself, have also put into place a coordination team to assist both in the acquisition of vaccines and the likes, so as to effectively bring about a greater measure of fairness when African states interact with these various institutions, these various pharmaceutical companies. And so really, those were some of the main, should I say, legal issues that specifically the Office of the Legal Counsel had to deal with, because we are principally an administrative body. So we mainly had to be concerned with staff issues and the running of the organ. And we believe that the development of the policy guideline really helped the organ to continue its work and to in fact maintain its effectiveness. I think the last thing I would touch on is that COVID-19 affected the elections of senior leadership within the African Union. In fact, we developed or delivered a legal opinion which indicated that at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, there was no in-house system for ensuring that elections which are held virtually could be free, fair, and indeed confidential. And so for the year 2020, the mandates of not just staff, but also elected members of the African Union were effectively extended because of the inability to conduct an effective election or a confidential elections via Zoom or other virtual platforms. However, we can say as an innovation that our ITC unit has developed an elections platform whereby various member states can elect various members to the senior leadership of the union, and their votes will be confidential. Indeed, at 3:30 today, the Permanent Representatives Committee will be holding a mock election of sorts to test out this program. So that is one of the innovations that arose as a response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So essentially that is it. I hope you got a great idea of some of the administrative issues that arose as a result of the pandemic and the responses adopted by the Office of the Legal Counsel to those issues. And I think mainly as a result of time, it will be difficult, I may even argue impossible, to look at the various measures adopted by specific organs of the union. I think it's a bit too almost immeasurable. But thank you for your attention, and I'll be available to respond to any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Stephen, for your intervention. You've thrown a lot of light on the work of the African Union and the challenges the COVID-19 has brought to play. Let me also remind the panelists that we'll have less than 30 minutes to round up this session. I had been told that our session will end in 30 minutes time. So I invite Ms. Wachia Kile to speak to us for 10 minutes, and so that we can have some time for the intervention from the participants. So Ms. Kile, please.
Thank you very much, President Tupekulu. My name is Wachia Kile. I'm a legal specialist with the International Development Law Organization. The International Development Law Organization, as you all know, is an intergovernmental organization that focuses on enhancing a culture of justice. In Kenya, and especially with regards to the topic at hand, which is COVID-19 and after, the agenda for the legal profession, the program which I manage, which is the Commercial Justice Sector Reforms Program, supported the judiciary in coming up with the electronic filing system. This is a system that allowed litigants to file their pleadings remotely and have them attended to by the court without the need for physical presence. As you all know, when COVID hit, the judiciary of Kenya suspended the physical hearings within the court. And it was necessary to enhance access to justice by providing an opportunity for litigants to be to have their cases heard by the judiciary through a virtual platform. Whereas this has been introduced, it has faced its own challenges, and we hope that in future, as we continue to grow, we continue to learn, and we'll continue to innovate the various systems that have been adopted by the judiciary and even with the private sector and the profession as well, in providing an opportunity for litigants to access the e-filing system and even improve it further. One of the key things that we noted was that in developing the e-filing system, partners like Lawyers Hub, partners like the Law Society of Kenya, the Nairobi chapter especially, are very important in reviewing the system itself and trying to improve how best to provide an enhanced experience, especially for litigants who, one, did not have law firms representing them or did not have an opportunity to access online services. I think a critical thing, especially for lawyers going forward, is much as we put aside funds or set aside funds for corporate social responsibility, perhaps once every year or twice every year. It would be important to start looking at shared value partnerships with the communities that are around us to ensure that they are also growing with us as we grow as a legal profession. So I think from our perspective as IDLO and from my perspective as a legal practitioner, it was very important to see how best to provide an opportunity for those, especially who could not access internet or who could not find access to the devices to log on and be part of a court process or be able to file their documents online. There's also that particular group of individuals who may not even understand what an email address is, which is mainly the platform that would be used to communicate decisions from the e-filing system. And just trying to see how best we as lawyers, when we are doing our corporate shared value sessions, can at least provide platforms for those whom we know would not be in a position to access legal services or to access judicial services once they have been converted from physical to online. Now, the other issue that IDLO also focused on was in supporting the judiciary in providing justice through alternative dispute resolution processes. A key support that we were able to do is there was the National Steering Committee on Alternative Dispute Resolution that was appointed by the Attorney General. And this particular steering committee's role was to look at policy interventions on ADR and legal reform, because if you have been reviewing the various legal reforms in Kenya, you'll realize that in the last 3 years, especially after the 2010 promulgation of the Constitution, that there's been a lot of intervention to come up with legal framework on various dispute resolution mechanisms. Post-COVID, it became even more important to have a synchronized and a more responsive legal regime on ADR, which the National Steering Committee is currently looking at and is also also in the process of reviewing the various legislative framework that exists to provide an increased access to justice through dispute resolution processes. Now, one of the key things that would be important to note that because of COVID, dispute resolution processes had to be carried out through either online platforms or through online sessions. And there was a lot of cry about confidentiality, about accessibility, and various institutions, for example, the African Arbitration Association came up with guidelines that would assist virtual sessions on ADR. These were adopted by several institutions, including the Nairobi Center for International Arbitration. And even the judiciary itself came up with the mediation, the virtual mediation guidelines to assist its mediators to be able to log on, and even not just the mediators, but even the litigants and those who are interested in mediation sessions to be able to log on and participate in dispute resolution forums without the need to be physically present at the courts or at the various centers where they would be doing this previously just before COVID. Now, going forward in the interest of especially creating opportunities and creating linkages, I think it would be good for the various legal professional institutions to just sit down and review how best are their members able to participate in such sessions, how best would they be able to protect the rights of those who are logging on to such sessions and being aware of their rights and obligations when participating in virtual mediation sessions or virtual arbitration sessions or even virtual court sessions. Of course, there have been a number of concerns, and one of the major concerns, and I think this is something that the legal profession needs to look at, is the etiquette of counsel or the etiquette of participants during virtual court sessions or virtual ADR processes. It's quite interesting to participate in a virtual court session or in a virtual ADR session, where sometimes 90% of the time is spent in confirming that the other parties can hear you, or that the other parties can see you, or that the other parties can see what you're trying to present. Of course, call drops, network dropping, and all those issues that frustrate connectivity and frustrate sessions of court proceedings or ADR sessions that affect the efficacy, especially if you were to say it that way, the efficacy of whatever justice is being meted through that particular proceeding are very important. And it would be very interesting to see how the legal profession especially comes up with guidelines on the etiquette of participating in such forums, not just for the lawyers, but also for the litigants and maybe even for the judicial officers. Thirdly, would be the question of capacity enhancement. I think COVID has taught us, and most legal professions, that we do need to enhance our capacity, and we do need to enhance not just our knowledge base, but even our capacity in terms of technology adoption. It was very evident at the beginning of the introduction of the various interventions that had been developed to mitigate the effects of COVID and enhance access to justice, that some of us could not even operate computers or phones or the various platforms that were available for purposes of for example, Zoom. I think at the beginning, we would have very many funny sessions ongoing. We did not understand how to protect the security of our sessions, just to avoid third-party hackers, or even to ensure that whatever data we were collecting during the processes was well managed, and that even before we could understand the different processes and the platforms that existed, it did not seem as though it was a seamless process. But thankfully, with time and as we grew in the online space, I believe that as lawyers we have grown and we have enhanced our skill, especially in joining online platforms. It would be important that going forward we look at how best to apply the various, because the interesting thing about technology is it changes. Every day it's mutating. So we have to keep ourselves abreast with all the changes. How do we do that without affecting, of course, our billable hours, and also just being able to grow in the profession as well. So capacity was a big feature for most, I think, most of us within the legal profession. And the fact that we also had to, I think most of us are on LinkedIn, most of us are on the various social platforms. It became very evident that we had to have a moment, not just to discuss whatever private issues that we had, but now to begin discussion on growing the profession through the social platforms and having a meaningful discourse through social platforms, and even having opportunity to take time off. Like, for example, today, I think not many of us would have been able to attend the session had it been a physical session. So, of course, taking advantage of that, taking advantage of the linkages between the different professional institutions, membership institutions that joined together, and giving us an opportunity to be part of an event that may have been exclusive to other professions or other members associations, for example. So this, I think, is one of the key lessons that we take forward. And one of the agendas, I think, going forward is how to continue cooperating as different membership institutions, as different membership associations, and having joint forums that are beneficial to all our members. And lastly, would be the question of engagement with the private sector or engagement with the public sector. I think as lawyers, it's become very important. It has been very important for us to not just stick with our own cocoon, not just network amongst lawyers only, but grow our networks by having meaningful engagements with different stakeholders out there so that you can give enhanced client-centric legal advice and even enhanced client-centric customer experience when resolving disputes. One of the key things that I've noted, for example, and this is evident through the courts, business court users committees, and the court users committees that have been established within the judiciary in Kenya under the National Council on Administration of Justice, it's evident that even with COVID, it's very important for us to, as legal practitioners, to have meaningful engagement with other stakeholders. I mean, sitting down to speak with lawyers amongst ourselves, we may not really understand how to give or how to enhance the jurisprudence that we're getting out of court to be more client-focused and rights-based. We may be only looking at the provisions of the law, but we forget about the interests of their clients in enhancing the responsiveness of the legal reform that is actually going on, or the provisions of the legal regimes that are in existence, to make it more, to make jurisprudence more sustainable, and even to ensure that in future, that even as we grow, because COVID has given us an opportunity to go back, reflect, and actually review the jurisprudence that is coming out of court, because right now not much jurisprudence is coming out of court. So we do have the time to reflect and review where we want to see jurisprudence going in the next 5 or 10 years. What role are lawyers playing, especially to make jurisprudence more sustainable and even be more client-centric going forward? I mean, nowadays, it's not just a question of this is the right and this is the wrong. It's more about the effect of the legal reform to all citizens or all interested parties. I think that's it from me, Mr. President, unless there are questions, and I'll be willing to take them later. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and appreciate your intervention. Before we call the next panelist, Linda, I'll invite you to look at the question and answer platform, where you will see that there's a question addressed to you. After Linda, you may be called upon to take that question. And also, if you look at the chat platform, you will see that there's a comment made by Aguel Frederick, which is in agreement with what you have said about the challenges from the virtual hearing or remote hearings. But I would like you to see, to profile some solutions to the issues identified by you and Frederick Aguel. Let me now call upon Linda to please make her presentation. Linda, please, if you can limit yourself to 12 minutes, it will be appreciated. Thank you, Linda.
Thank you, President Obeghulu. So I'm speaking as a legal practitioner. I'm also the Vice President of the Commonwealth Lawyers Association, so on a bar association, and also I have a position on the Africa Regional Forum of the IBA. So in terms of the first issue of responding and adjusting to COVID-19, an agenda for the legal profession in Africa, I think one of the things we absolutely have to accept is that with COVID, there's come an economic downturn, and that affects our business as lawyers. I know, for example, there have been some lawyers in my jurisdiction who believe that bar associations should provide some sort of social protection for lawyers. I'm not sure how sustainable that is. But for me, I think that we need to identify the opportunity in the crisis, as the Chinese saying goes. And we need to follow where the money is. So, for example, there are certain sectors of the economy that are doing very well, even within this COVID sector. I know, for example, in large jurisdictions, intellectual property is doing very well. in probably all jurisdictions. Insolvency and restructuring of companies has become a topical area of practice. Also, with regards to the courts, as our previous speaker has highlighted, this is now an opportunity for the courts to go digital, so to speak. But I think, as she presented in her challenges, it probably isn't for everyone. We do have indigent litigants who are not able to access virtual hearings or other facilities. But I think we should probably go the route of encouraging virtual hearings in commercial matters where the litigants clearly are of means, or by consent of the parties. Parties who have access to the facilities on both sides and are able to communicate via virtual hearings. I think also, I also like to mention that in criminal matters, I did come across news of the Kenyan courts using technology to deliver judgments to prisoners in prison virtually, which I thought was an excellent way of decongesting the prisons and avoiding contracting COVID during the process. I also think that perhaps if your practice has slowed down somewhat during this time, this is a good opportunity to work on your law firm management skills and improve your systems within your practice to ensure efficiency of your practice. It's also a good time to hone your leadership skills. We're all leading through crisis as owners of our law firms, or perhaps even leaders who are not the partner within a law firm. This is now an opportunity to hone your leadership skills and manage your staff through this crisis, which may involve making some very tough decisions. It's also important to be mindful of employee welfare during this time. People are very anxious. People are losing members of their families, their workmates, their church mates. And so it's a very difficult time. It's not business as usual. We also have to bear in mind staff welfare, because the staff are the most critical part of any business. They make the money for us. And a healthy and happy staff is a healthy and happy business. Then also, I would encourage all of you to use the opportunity digital platforms to engage on in such conferences such as this, such as the PALU conference. I also take this opportunity to advise that the Commonwealth Lawyers Association will be having its conference in September of this year, from the 5th to the 9th. These are opportunities to network and also to learn and grow in different aspects of the law. So I'd encourage people to, as I say, take the opportunity out of the crisis. In terms of the second point on the role of lawyers in protecting constitutionalism and civic space during the time of COVID, I would say that all lawyers should be worried about the absence of constitutionalism and the rule of law, as it does affect business. And a clear example of this is, for example, internet shutdowns, like we've seen in Uganda following the general elections. You know, an absence of the rule of law does affect the bottom line. And for those of you who are human rights activists, this is also an opportunity to protect and defend those lawyers that come in conflict with the law, to protect the civic space within your countries. With COVID came lockdowns in very many African countries, and subsequently led to a lot of breaches of not only civil and political rights, but also economic and social rights that affect the welfare of ordinary citizens who are being restrained from conducting their livelihoods, who are being beaten for being out at the wrong place at the wrong time. So these are all things that people need to be mindful of as they practice the law. And I would also encourage more of you. There's often there's a shortage of human rights defenders in various countries when these things are occurring. I would encourage those of you who can to offer your services pro bono to people who find themselves subject to human rights violations in their various countries. Because this is an area of practice, obviously, that doesn't make a lot of money, but it's absolutely necessary for the fabric of every democracy and country. The other issue that I would like to talk about is women in leadership in the judicial and legal professions in Africa. You know, we're still very far from where we need to be in this regard. I think we're seeing some progress with regards to judicial appointments, certainly in my country, Zambia. We have a lot of women judges, but what we're not seeing so much of is women leading at the bar, whether it's at bar associations or becoming partners of their firms, or even owners of their firms. Now, this is changing slowly with time, but there's certainly a lot more work that can be done, and bar associations can play a critical role. I'm very pleased to see PALU, for example, balancing its panels. Representation does matter because the different genders have a different, something different to offer. And also there's no homogeneity even amongst the female gender. So if as many women can come to the fore as possible, we'll get a different set of ideas and thoughts that will be brought to the table. I'm very pleased to see that in Uganda, we have an all-female executive of bar leaders. That's the president, vice president, secretary, and treasurer, which is really gratifying to see. So we are making progress in some regards, and this needs to be encouraged. With regards to development in legal technology, with a particular focus on legal education in Africa, the primary problem really is access to technology. You know, so many lawyers, and particularly young lawyers, can't afford data and other things. And you'd be surprised that so I think somebody mentioned it, our previous speaker, that even some people don't have access to email. It's quite shocking that in this day and age this happens. And so we need to encourage our governments to make data more affordable, to make technology more affordable so that our continent does not get left behind, because we will be left behind. And I'll come to that when we get to the last point around restitution of the African heritage. But if COVID has taught us anything, it is that technology is a critical tool in our work. We've seen how ubiquitous Zoom has become for lawyers. Now we can connect to people all around the world. It's made things cheaper for us. For example, if you do have virtual hearings, now you can call your witnesses from various jurisdictions without having to fly them in, for example, whether it's an arbitration, whether it's a court case. So these are all tools that are now assisting us to make our work easier and to connect us more to those other lawyers across the world. And indeed has made this conference in particular possible for us. So there's need to embrace technology to increase efficacy and efficiency in the work that we do. Now, of course, in relation to legal education, as much as possible, our bar schools do need to make provision for our student lawyers to at least learn how to use these tools, at least while they're at school, even as they're earning the capacity to develop their own capacity to own technology and acquire data to facilitate that technology. So it's really important that our bar schools pay attention to that. so that we stay in touch with legal trends all around the world. Lastly, I'd like to speak on the topic of restitution of African heritage from American and European capture, as it's been put here. So I think as Africans, what we need to do more than anything, I mean, the problem with colonization is it created an other out of us. You know, often you'll see studies, you know, that feature data from Asia, from Europe, from Australasia and the Americas, and they'll leave Africa out completely. There's just no data on us, on what we're doing. And I think that's becoming a huge problem. So I think what we need to do is to embrace the fact, to embrace our humanity, our inherent dignity as people who belong in this world, who belong on any stage in the world, and truly believe and assert that we have something to offer the world. And I think that starts with you know, the philosophy of Ubuntu. I am because we are. And we need to break down barriers of otherness. You know, we are all human beings and we all have equal value and something to offer. And it starts with us believing that in ourselves and believing that we as a people can equally be as excellent as any other person on this planet. But we also need to compete because we won't be taken, nobody will take notice of us unless we're competitive on the global stage. So it's up to us as lawyers to perform up to international standards and to keep abreast with legal trends so that we are relevant, so that we are counted, so that we are included. And I'll just end on that note and just say that I'm really thankful for this opportunity and I look forward to engaging with all of you on the topics that I have discussed. Thank you very much, President.
Thank you, Linda. I want to thank all the panelists, and there are few questions on the Q&A platform and again the chat platform. But before, I will invite the panelists to take 1 minute each to make your final presentation, and please incorporate your responses to the issues raised by participants on the Q&A platform and the chat platform. Before then, let me also throw in one question to each of the panelists in winding down. I'll ask you to take 1 minute each to give us your concluding statement. Linda, you will speak to what key challenges did you face in 2020? Were you able to overcome some or all of them? You want to share your experience with us? I doubt whether 1 minute will be enough, but manage what you can within the 1 minute. I would like Stephen to tell us, what would you say within the legal profession that COVID-19 has impacted on the professional lives of men and women differently? Can you think in what ways or give some examples? And then Wachia Kilel, how has the International Development Law Organization coped with COVID-19? Have you been able to ensure business continuity? Let me start with Linda. Linda, please, in 1 minute, round up before I hand over to the next session. Thank you. Linda? Okay,
Sorry about that. I was going to say the key challenge that I faced during this pandemic is actually, for me, keeping my staff safe. And, you know, at the very beginning of the pandemic, there was a lot of anxiety around how to protect ourselves from getting infected, really understanding what the virus meant. So now I have to manage our staff's welfare, not only physically, but mentally. I think that's the biggest challenge that I've faced over this pandemic, in short. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Wachia, do you want to speak to how IDLO has coped with COVID-19?
Thank you very much. IDLO has coped with COVID-19 by embracing technology. So we have been working from home. We have, when it started, we were working from home, but now we have a hybrid timeshare system where we can be able to work. But most importantly was how we worked with our implementing partners, which is, just as I explained before, supporting them to embrace technology and using that to ensure that they actually meet on their obligations and their mandate, and they deliver on the same. So technology has been a key facilitator for IDLO and its implementing partners to be able to deliver on their mandate. I don't know if President will allow me to address the questions that had been raised to me. Or...
Chair, if you don't mind, can you address them on the Q&A platform and the chat platform so that other participants can follow? We are running short of time. Thank you very much. Let me invite Stephen to speak to what challenges, or what would you say, COVID-19 has impacted professional lives of women and men differently.
Thank you once again for the opportunity. I think at our level, and here I speak principally of international civil servants with a legal mandate, I can't really think of any real issue that that distinguishes men and women in terms of the impact of COVID-19. Certainly, they are not really going to be legal issues. It's mainly practical issues. So let's say if the head of the OLC is a woman, and certainly due to cultural obligations, working from home may not be as simple for her as it would be for, let's say, a single man like myself. So it's principally just practical. But as the previous speaker stated, by embracing technology, I think we've been able to mitigate quite a number of issues. However, I don't really think there's much of a distinction between the psychological impacts of working from home on women and men. So at our level, at least at the at the level of the Office of the Legal Counsel and international civil servants, I don't see much distinction. However, we recognize that in the general population, there certainly would be. Yeah, so I don't really see much of a distinction legally, but it's principally practical in terms of family relations, etc. But nothing more beyond that.
Thank you, Stephen. For me, it's to thank all the panelists and Don, and of course the moderator and the team behind the IT infrastructure for what has been a good time. Let me assure the participants that this conversation continues on the question and answer and the chat platform. If you have questions for any of the panelists, I think I speak for all of us who are in this panel to say that we'll be available on the Q&A platform for the next hour 30 minutes to speak to share ideas on some of the questions that has been asked. And I think also that any panelists who can answer any questions should please come to the Q&A session or Q&A platform or the chat room. Let's keep the conversation going. Permit me now to invite the chair of the next session, Gigi Wade-Miles, who is the treasurer of Pan-African Lawyers Union. Gigi will join us from Southern Africa. Gigi, are you there?
Chair, actually, it's Vice President Fatia Mesuz who's chairing this session. Gigi is chairing tomorrow.
Okay, Fatia. I can see Fatia. She's already smiling. Fatia, you're welcome, and please take the floor.
Oui, je suis là, Monsieur le Président. Merci. Merci, Monsieur le Président. Est-ce que vous m'entendez?
Yes, I can hear you, Fatia.
Alors qu'il me soit tout d'abord permis de souhaiter la bienvenue à tous nos invités panélistes et puis à tous les participants qui ont bien voulu partager avec nous ce moment que PALU se propose, nous a donné l'opportunité de le partager avec eux. Alors, en ce qui concerne la session que je serai amenée à diriger, concerne les femmes leaders de la profession juridique en Afrique. Tout d'abord, je me présente, je suis le vice-président de l'Union panafricaine. Je représente l'Afrique du Nord. Je suis avocat de profession et de carrière, enseignante à l'origine, et actuellement, je dirige 2 cabinets d'avocats à Florence et en Tunisie. Bien entendu, l'impact du Covid-19 sur tous les dirigeants, sur la profession juridique en particulier, a été pour le moins dévastateur. Nos cabinets, vous savez qu'ils ont été perturbés, étant donné qu'on était amené à renoncer à nos moyens traditionnels de gestion et pas mal de budgets aussi ont été perturbés. Et donc c'est dans un moment comme celui-là, bien entendu, demande à tous les dirigeants et particulièrement à la profession d'avocat, aux avocats, de s'engager dans une réflexion sur la voie à suivre pour limiter l'effet dévastateur du Covid. Et c'est dans cette perspective que nos chers panélistes intervenants vont se proposer de nous partager leurs perspectives et leur expérience afin de discuter de la voie à suivre. Les participants, alors je les présente très brièvement et c'est à eux s'ils veulent bien entendu nous donner plus de détails. Et excusez-moi la prononciation. D'abord, les intervenants, je présente Madame Féan Nabassaol, qui est la présidente de Oranda Law Society. Madame Jarpa Dawen, qui est la directrice exécutive de Institute for African Women in Law, et Madame Lisette Robert de Howard, qui est le responsable des programmes internationaux au sein de Law Society of England and Wales. Nos chers panélistes seront amenés à répondre à certaines questions qui concernent bien entendu cet effet dévastateur de Covid, et ces questions concernent particulièrement les défis que les femmes du secteur juridique rencontrent en ce qui concerne l'accès aux postes de direction. Ça, c'est une question générale qui est indépendamment de Covid. Et puis, la deuxième question qui est plus ciblée et qui concerne les inégalités affectant les femmes dans la profession, si elles ont été exaspérées ou non en raison de la pandémie Covid. Une autre question qui concerne comment les barreaux et les cabinets d'avocats peuvent corriger les inégalités entre les sexes dans les postes de direction en leur sein. Et la dernière question concerne les meilleures pratiques résultant à l'ère du Covid-19 du leadership des femmes dans la profession juridique. Sans m'attarder davantage, puisque le temps qui nous est imparti est de 1h10, je passe directement la parole à Madame Féan Nabassaol, présidente de Oranda Law Society, pour nous faire une présentation sur le thème le thème des femmes leaders de la profession juridique en Afrique. À vous la parole, madame. Madame Féan, est-ce que vous m'entendez?
Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup.
Je vous en prie. Alors, je coupe mon micro.
Oui. Bonjour, Madame Fatia. Thank you so much. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm very glad to be part of of this event, and it's very exciting to see so many people from all over the globe. I bring greetings from the Uganda Law Society. My name is Fiona Nabasa Wall, and I'm the President of Uganda Law Society. And as Linda spoke before, one of the presenters before, I'm privileged to serve on a council, the top executive dominated by jurisdictions, I'm sure. So it means legal profession in Africa. And first of all, I want to say thank you to all the panelists in the previous panel. It's such a moving and invigorating discussion. We're talking about the COVID-19 pandemic, the inequalities affecting women in the legal profession, unique vantage point from which to discuss and view the progress of women in society in general, because we know that the legal profession is one of the most powerful, well-remunerated and respected professions in the world, but it's also one of those professions that favors women. In education, favors women to the humanities, and law is one of those humanities that we ascribe to as women naturally because of our biology, because of our emotional intelligence and our affinity for the arts that speak to human beings and how they work. The law not only plays a foundational role in democracy, but it also is often a stepping stone to higher levels of leadership in business and public life. However, in many ways, we've not always been very fortunate as women leaders in the legal profession. And I just want to highlight a few challenges that women, pardon?
Actually, it seems that your connection has just become quite poor in the last few minutes. Just try again and we see if it's any better, or we try and see what can be done.
Okay, can you hear me now, right now? Maybe let me try.
C'est dommage.
We still can't hear you. Madam Vice President, I don't know, maybe we switch and you call on one of the other panelists to proceed, and then we give President Fiona
Exactement, c'est ce que j'allais proposer. Alors, en attendant que Madame Féan répare sa connexion, j'appelle Madame Jarpa Dawin, directrice exécutive de Institute for African Women in Law. Si elle souhaite, elle voudrait bien présenter donc son intervention en attendant que Madame Féan répare sa connexion. Est-ce que vous m'entendez, Madame Jarpa?
Yes, I can. Yeah, can you hear me?
Okay.
Yeah, okay, good. Yeah. All right. Well, greetings.
Alors, vous prenez le relais, s'il vous plaît, en attendant.
Okay. So greetings to everyone, wherever you are located. I would like to send a big thank you to PALU for organizing this wonderful conference at such a time in the world where everything is moved to virtual. And so for you to go ahead and get this done is a great thing. And I thank all the panelists, the esteemed panelists on this 3-day conference, and also all the attendees for making time to be part of this discussion. So as I've been introduced, I am a professor of political science at Howard University in Washington, D.C. And I'm also the founder and executive director of the Institute for African Women in Law. It's a nonprofit organization based in Washington, D.C., but working across the continent of Africa and the Black diaspora to promote issues on women within the legal professions. So I am coming to this panel discussion more from the perspective of a researcher and also as a practitioner, an advocate, someone who advocates for issues affecting women within the profession. I'm on the topic of women within the profession.
Prof.
Yeah.
Sorry, Prof. I'm going to request that you speak just a little bit slower to make it easier for the interpreters to get into Arabic, French, and Portuguese. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I will try to do that. I get very fast in my speaking when I'm excited, like I am excited today to be among such great attendees and panelists. So I'll move on for the sake of time to talk about the question about women within the legal professions. I come from the perspective of research. So I'm going to talk about data. I'm going to talk about what I have done in my research and what the Institute has been doing. Data is important because it informs us what is actually happening. And with this data, it's not just counting numbers. We are also talking to people. So our research is highly qualitative. We listen, we do interviews to hear the experiences, what we call the lived experiences of women within the profession. So within this scope, we have been focusing in the past couple of years on women within the judiciary. Now, as we know, the legal professions is divided into different categories. So we have the bar, the bench, the academia, the general counsel, and many other spaces. Within the judiciary, the research we have done for the last couple of years shows some very interesting trends, which I want to highlight. And I want to call this the myths and the facts. The myth we often hear around the world or within the continent of Africa is that we don't have women in leadership positions, or that we have women who are sidelined and do not have a voice. There is some fact to that. Because once again, when we're talking about these issues, we're talking about the huge continent of over 55 nations. And so there is a lot of difference across the different countries. Now, if you're looking at the countries that we have worked on so far, the myths have been busted, which is that there are women in leadership positions within the judiciary. Take, for example, if you look at the colonizing countries, United Kingdom, France, maybe lesser ones like Germany or Spain, you find out that in Africa, we have had women rise to the top leadership positions as chief justices and presidents of constitutional courts in civil law countries, starting with Ghana, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, Rwanda, and the number keeps growing. And so what explains this ability of women to rise to top leadership positions? Take, for example, Ghana and Nigeria. They were colonized by the British, but these two countries put women in the top judicial positions before Great Britain did. So that tells us something, that even though women have had a late entry into the legal profession in Africa because we were colonized and educational opportunities were not available, we have been able to progress in terms of women joining the judiciaries, rising to the judicial ranks, and then being given the opportunity to be leaders. Now, within the international level, we also find out that African women across the continent have joined international courts and tribunals. Take, for example, FACT, the African Court on Human and People's Rights based in Arusha, Tanzania, where our PALU executive CEO is located, is currently the court that has the most number of women judges on the court in the world. Now, take also, for example, the International Criminal Court, ICC, based in The Hague. African women have been the most represented on that court compared to the European region, which has had the least women, but more men. So what is this telling us? That within the African context, women are rising to leadership positions at the domestic level and in the international level. Now, if I move away from the judiciary and I come to the legal profession, the bar, we also find some progress being made. We have places where, of course, what we call the feminization of the legal profession. More women are becoming lawyers. More women are getting into top positions within law firms. So take, for example, in Nigeria, some of the top law firms in Nigeria have close to 50% of women as partners within the law firms. In Ghana, where I come from, we also have some of the top law firms having women as partners in law firms. That is not something you will find in the United States. That is not something you will find in the UK because of the. So once again, despite these facts, there are also problems that we need to be mindful of, and I'm going to round up time for discussion. That despite the progress, and I'm very intentional about highlighting the progress, because we don't always want to be in that position and being seen as lacking in agency. African women, we need to look at African women from the pre-colonial perspective, the important positions we had in societies, colonization, and then after colonization, we had dictatorships where it also had an impact on gender roles. So African women have had to navigate all of these historical processes of redefining their position in society. But like the Phoenix, we continue to rise. And despite the progress made, the women at the domestic level and the international level, African women in law are progressing as deans in law across the continent, but still really challenging within the judiciary. Some are still struggling to rise up ranks of the judiciary. Take, for example, they're still struggling to have women as judges. And so we have a woman who is fighting, who has set up her Anna setting the bar to promote women, to get women to be appointed as judges. Of course, in other places like Zambia, have more women into the judiciary. What are the challenges? Within the bar, women are doing comparatively well, but at the within the bench, at the bench, as judges, but at the bar, as lawyers, we also see progress being. But the question remains: what are the leadership positions with the bar? I have not seen in data. Only a few countries have had as leaders of the bar, and that is an issue that needs to be addressed. Nigeria has never had a woman. Well, had a woman who was for a short while acting, but still no woman has been the chair or the president of the Nigerian bar. In Ghana, the same can be said. No woman is the president of the bar association. So we need to find out what has to be allowed leadership position in the bar. Why is it important to have because leadership has to reflect representation within the bar. If more women are within the bar, we need to address historical challenges. We need to recognize that the bar is a historically patriarchal institution imported from the Western regions, common law. And so we also need to look at the issue of role models and women who are going to open the play, the opportunities, become the first. More women go through that and therefore begin to create a new institutional or professional culture that recognizes that women are leaders and that lead, they lead the
Prof, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. Prof, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. There's some interruption on the Zoom by the Arabic interpreter. So you were saying valuable things and we can't hear you, so everybody's complaining. So maybe we pause for a moment until our technical team tell us they have resolved it. I'm sorry about that.
Okay.
Okay, technical team, we're waiting to hear from you that you've resolved the issue with the interruption that was coming from the Arabic interpreter.
Okay.
Maybe we try again, Prof.
Okay. All right. Well, attendees, I'm sorry that you couldn't hear, and I don't know where you may have lost me. And in the interest of time, I think I cannot go over everything. I'm going to round up, and then maybe when it's time for Q&A, I might be able to answer some of your questions directly. So to summarize, I think what the point I was trying to get across is that there are facts and there are myths. The myths have been paraded for a long time that across the continent of Africa, women do not get authority or do not have authority to be in leadership positions. The facts, based on research, based on data, is that across the continent in different spaces, we have seen progress being made with women joining the legal professions, whether at the bar, the bench, academia, or other spaces within the profession. Despite this progress being made, women joining and women also rising to leadership positions as chief justices, presidents of constitutional courts, we also see progress at the international level, where currently the African Court on Human and People's Rights based in Arusha has the highest number of women judges than any court in the world. At the International Court of Justice, African women top any other region of the world in terms of women's representation. And then we have an African woman from Uganda who is serving at the International Court of Justice. At the bench, progress has been made. In some law firms across Africa that I have studied, women are also partners in these law firms, managing partners in these law firms. And women as partners is not something you easily see even in these industrialized countries like the United States or Great Britain. So what are some of the factors that explain these? The issue is that even though these facts exist, there are also continuing challenges women have to deal with within the profession. At the bar, the continuity of patriarchal norms, socio-cultural gender norms, the idea of some level of sexual harassment still exists within the profession. Women have to juggle their private lives and their professional lives as lawyers. With the issue of COVID-19, women have had to work from home remotely in most cases and still have to be taking care of their children and their extended family obligations. So in a nutshell, all of these factors do exist. They combine in different ways to affect different women differently. And so we need to have a larger conversation within the bar at PALU, as we are doing now, within other bar associations, to talk about how we can open up opportunities for women at the bar to be able to rise to leadership positions so we can have shared governance that takes into account the lived experiences of women and men for the common good of all members of the bar associations. So I'll end on this note and I'll be open for any questions or discussions later. Thank you all for listening and I yield to Ms. Fatia.
Merci professeur. J'aimerais bien revenir à la première intervenante. Si la connexion de son Internet a été corrigée, Madame Féan Nabassawol. Si vous m'entendez, veuillez me répondre s'il vous plaît. Sinon, autrement, je passe à Madame Lisette.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Super.
I'll start again.
Si vous voulez bien reprendre, donc... Allô?
Okay, merci. Thank you very much.
Je vous donne tout de suite la parole. J'espère qu'il n'y aura plus d'interruption.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm glad that and honored that I came to speak after the professor, somebody I really, really admire. And I really admire her work in actually empowerment of women and in fronting women leaders all over the continent. Thank you for those remarks because they've made my work very easy. So the professor has listed that the boundaries of sorry, not the boundaries, but the bottlenecks that women leaders face in the legal profession. And of course, we have the issue of culture, if I may add to them, and the gender stereotypes and the discrimination that is so socially ingrained in our culture, that it happens in the workplace almost unconsciously. Therefore, she's mentioned sexual harassment. We have issues like the gender wage gap, which are problems that are faced even by women in the Western world. We have, I was looking at participation of women, especially in the legal financial sector, and it says only 14%. A research by the Financial Conduct Authority says that only 14% of lawyers that practice private equity, hedge fund, and financial business generally globally are women. So that also shows you that at a global level even a penetration of certain aspects of practice is very limited. COVID-19, of course, presented very special problems, and it accentuated the inequalities that are facing women because COVID-19 is not just a health issue. It's been a profound shock to our societies and economies, and the women have been at the heart because they've had to play a balancing trick for both, just as they're working at home, but then also the aspects of participating in stabilizing their homes, because one of the peculiarities that happened is that schools were closed and mothers have to now participate in educating their children from home. And this creates caregiving challenges and a lot more that sort of worsens the balance game that women are always involved in because of their work-life balance challenge. We've had a big issue with embracing technology and also getting women to be viewed as valuable assets in the workplace in the legal profession. Because you see, when we look at the big four and the audit firms, they use flexi time. They actually promote flexi hours, and this has allowed a lot of women to thrive in that profession in audit in all over the world. But in the legal practice, this is not something that has been embraced, especially in Africa. So you find that because of that, women still have to make this a priority, despite again the balancing. So what is the role of? I'd like to move now to, because that has been really dwelt on, the role of law societies and law firms in redressing these gender inequalities in leadership positions. Just to give you a drop I like what Professor Dawani said. One, we have gone a long way. We've done it very well, especially, and I find that women leaders and women lawyers thrive in very standardized, very structured practice areas like banking. You find that banking women are really excelling. You find that corporate and government institutions have a lot of women lawyers. In Uganda, we have a lot of organizations that are led by women lawyers, but you find that when it comes to private practice, women are still not very present. In Uganda, we have about 150 law firms that are female-led, and this is out of 1,400 law firms. And this, for me, speaks to the realities. So what can the Uganda Law Society, for instance, and other institutions do? First of all, as a society and as lawyers, we need to understand the global barriers limiting the general career progression of women in the legal sector. And we need to realize that this is going to have to be a joint effort. So we have to promote and encourage our members to adopt and implement policies that tackle gender inequality. I'd like to give an example of one of the most powerful women in Uganda, who's the Speaker of Parliament. She introduced, when she was president of the Federation of Women Lawyers, she introduced a legal aid clinic because of the problems of gender-based violence that we're facing in 1998. Now, something else that she has done is introduce what we call the gender balance certificate in Parliament. So when government is offering any positions for filling, the candidates that are presented, the whole recruitment process has to pass a gender balance test, meaning there has to be almost equal numbers of candidates that are going to be reviewed by the parliamentary committees before appointment. That alone has created a great impact and has contributed greatly, I think, to the employment balance, gender balance in the progress that we've made in the public sector. We need to also play a role in catalyzing change within our jurisdictions as law societies. I'm proud to say that the Uganda Law Society launched sexual harassment and anti-sexual harassment policy last year. And yes, in 2019. And I'm very happy to say that the whole, the last half of 2020 was spent with law firms having discussions about sexual harassment, documenting stories, and trying to see how to empower young lawyers and protect them. As the Uganda Law Society, we're now advocating for the passing of the Sexual Offences Bill that cures a few problems that the existing laws present. For instance, the fact that the victims of SGBV are usually, all our laws right now anticipate and predict and presume that victims of sexual offences are always women. So that is also something to correct. So that's something that the Bar Association has been doing. So getting involved and being at the forefront of law reform to deal with the cultural issues in our communities is something that we need to do. We also have something very peculiar that I'll give credit right now, is that we have to create male champions for change. Why do we have to do this? We need gender-sensitive lawyers that are willing, male lawyers that are willing to be he for she's. Why? Because these men are already in power. They're already established. They have voices. They're very well placed, and what they say goes. And until we get them onto our side, we're not going to get anywhere. As the Uganda Law Society, we're almost 50-50 in membership, but the membership that votes is majority are men. So the fact that we have a lot of women on the council right now is testimony to the he for she's and the male champions that we have. So we cannot do it without them. We also have the issue of zero tolerance for sexual harassment. This is something that in African tradition, with all our cultures and our social bias, we're going to have to actually engage in conversations, engage in deliberate policy change, mindset change, down to the community levels. The Uganda Law Society, for instance, has, and I like one of the panelists in the earlier panel was encouraging lawyers to give up their time freely. And the Uganda Law Society has a legal aid project, and we use this legal aid project to do a lot of public awareness campaigns. One of the things that we've also been doing is encouraging law firms and other corporate institutions to speak about the realities of sexual harassment and create champions. And for instance, participating in the 16 days of violence, activism last year was really interesting to see a lot of men coming out as champions. We also have to be very deliberate about women supporting other women initiatives. I can give testimony of our own situation in the Law Society that when I was standing for president, for instance, there were 2 women that were standing, and then we had the women also standing for the other positions. And the Female Lawyers Committee of the Uganda Law Society documented these women and decided to promote them and to encourage other women to vote for them. So we need women supporting other women. So the women in power have a responsibility to ensure that they pull up each other, they support each other, and they are deliberate about helping address the challenges that women lawyers face in the workplace. The issue of targets and quotas. Some of our countries have gone very far, like Uganda, to give quotas, especially when it comes to maybe opportunities. For instance, when you're going to to university, you get ladies get 1.5 points added to their qualifications, and this has been very key, I think, in increasing the number of lawyers that we have in the legal profession. But we see a lot of girls dropping out in at primary school level, so maybe we need to rethink some of these things and policies, but just to make sure that we even have employment quotas, that our bar association upload institutions that and law firms that have balanced partnerships and have gender balance within their recruitment policies. I think these are things that we need to applaud and use the carrot, not the stick, because I believe that businesses have a right to choose whom they employ. Then the other thing that has excluded women a lot has been the obsessive and excessive competition within the legal sector, and this promotes unethical practice, and women have a bit of a natural aversion to that. So this is one of the barriers, and I think that if we can embrace ethical practice, if we can promote ethical practice by sharing best practices, embracing technology, increasing accountability, increasing the structures and systems within our law firms, I think we will widen the space for women to get included in practice. Leading from the top and by example, it is really, it goes without saying that when women are in leadership, they seem to be held to a higher standard than most men. And unfortunately, when a man makes a mistake, they're usually forgiven or it's accorded to them. But when a woman makes a mistake and she's in a position of power, many times she sort of ruins it for those that come after her. So that creates a lot of responsibility for any woman that has been able to reach anywhere and progress in any way in their career. So I think we need to create support systems to enable these women to create legacies and empower other leaders to follow them. We need to embrace technology. I cannot say this enough. We need to rethink how we are working in our workplaces. We need to realize, do we, for instance, have to all be in the office? Do we have to, if somebody is on maternity leave, isn't there a certain amount of work they can do? How do we help? Because we have brilliant women in the law firms that are managers and are maybe better at management and business development than they are at litigation. These are the things that we need to look into in talent management and be very deliberate. All in all, the globe has really suffered COVID in a special way, and it's united us because it gives us a common enemy. And I think this is a point where it needs to unite the genders. But I also would like to refer you to the yin and yang concept of the Chinese that really, and the Asians, that really talks about the importance of having a full picture that comes from having a full integration of both genders. And until we realize that we cannot, if, for instance, a law firm cannot be very balanced and meet all its clients' needs and be relatable and manage business development, if it does not excel at trying to balance the different genders within the firm. So I'd like to end there and just say thank you so much for this opportunity. And I'd like to say that this is going to benefit everybody, not just women lawyers. And yes, there are peculiar things that women lawyers face, but we cannot do it without also the men. And we cannot do it without even thinking about it from a business perspective, because women lawyers have a lot to bring to the table when it comes to governance. Thank you very much.
Donc, à mon tour de vous remercier pour votre intervention que personnellement je trouve très riche et très intéressante, surtout qu'elle est venue compléter et donc celle qui nous a été présentée par le professeur Jarpa. Alors, maintenant, je cède la parole à Madame Lisette Robleto, excusez-moi encore une fois la prononciation, responsable des programmes internationaux au sein de Law Society of England and Wales. À vous la parole, madame, si vous m'entendez. Est-ce que vous m'entendez?
Yes, perfectly.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madam
Super. Je vous cède la parole.
And the pronunciation is perfect, so no problems at all there.
Non, la prononciation de votre nom, et pour ça, je vous dois de m'excuser.
No, not at all. There's no reason for excusing.
Okay.
Well, firstly, I am grateful to the Pan-African Lawyers Union for inviting me to speak at this important panel. That is Women in Leadership in Law in Africa, in this brave new world of digital. I am also humbled to be sharing this panel with such a distinguished women leaders and role models. I lead on the Law Society's International Rule of Law programs, which includes an international Women in Law program through which we have been collaborating with the Pan-African Lawyers Union. I echo Professor Dawuni's analysis that there has been progress in the judiciary and the legal profession in Africa in terms of gender equality, but of course we must not be complacent that there is a lot that remains to be done. In addition, I concur with Professor Dawuni's and President Walt's comments that there are serious challenges to the legal profession and gender equality, including sexual harassment, cultural, social norms, and stereotypes. So wider conversations are needed. I also agree with President Waltz that given the hierarchical nature of the legal profession, strong leadership on this agenda is required, as well as women supporting other women's and male champions for change, as crucial element for making those transformational changes in the legal profession and beyond. So, with regards to my presentation, I want to address the challenges that women lawyers experience in the legal sector, specifically concerning taking on leadership positions. In June 2019, the Law Society launched its global report on gender equality in the legal profession, advocating for change, transforming the future of the legal profession through greater gender equality, which reflects the diversity of views collected from 34 roundtables held in 21 cities across 18 jurisdictions and with the participation of over 700 female lawyers. In Africa, we run 10 roundtables in 5 countries, Ghana, Kenya, Nigeria, Rwanda, and Zambia, reaching in 5 cities, reaching... Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, Lizette. Yes, Lizette, we can hear you well. I think it was a problem of people who had muted the original audio, which is English. So I think it's a small problem that's been cleared now. So go right ahead.
Okay, so shall I start again?
No, I think just go ahead. I think affected were only 1 or 2 people. So you go on. You don't have to restart.
Okay, thank you. So just to summarize, I was basically explaining that with regards to the Law Society, we undertook research that is called the Advocating for Change, Transforming the Future of the Legal Profession Through Greater Gender Equality. And in Africa, we run 10 roundtables in 5 countries, Ghana, Kenya, Nigeria, Rwanda, and Zambia, in 5 cities, reaching over 200 women lawyers at different stages in their careers, showcasing the wide range of experiences of female lawyers in the region, and with the participation of over 200 women. There were several issues that came out quite strongly from the research, and these are 4. Unconscious and conscious bias, gender pay gap and unfair remuneration, networking or the lack of networking opportunities, and limited opportunities for flexible working. However, due to the time in this particular panel, I want to focus on conscious and unconscious bias. So conscious and unconscious bias relate to gender traditional role and stereotypes and stereotypical attitudes that are directly affecting women. Participants concur that there is still a male-dominated system of values and role, which is not confined to Africa, that expect women to play a greater domestic role in society. These views prejudice and constrain women's professional development and agency. Participants explain that conscious and unconscious bias can detrimentally impact their female colleagues, especially against those women lawyers who aspire to achieve positions of leadership. I will share 3 examples on how this is expressed. So in one instance, a participant shared that people question her competence when standing for an official leadership role in her professional body, not on the grounds of her qualification or competence, but on the grounds that she was a mother and had children. But luckily, she was not discouraged and decided to stand anyway, because she wanted to bring gender equality in her presidential agenda and eliminate the myth of women lawyers and mothers not being able to fulfill leadership roles. In another jurisdictions, participants were disheartened to find that the saying, "there are no women at the bar," is proudly articulated by some of their men counterparts, which not only made women feel unwelcome, but also made them compelled to prove that they had earned their seat at the table by working twice harder, which they felt that was extremely unfair. Participants also said that there are negative assumptions about women lawyers of childbearing age, suggesting that they would inevitably leave the business to have children, be constantly off sick, requesting long period of leave with childcare issues, or that as a caregiver, they are not committed to their jobs. Respondents also concur that returning to work after maternity leave or a career break was one of the biggest issues facing women lawyers. Prominent in the responses were also discussions about the double burden, which is unpaid labor in the domestic sphere and paid labor in the workplace. Many noted how the legal profession is geared towards a long hours culture, with many events being held at the end of the day, making it often unsuitable for women with caring responsibilities. Participants also reported that with the double burden, there is also the guilt about spending time on professional development. Participants also reflected that this constant bombardment of conscious and unconscious bias not only adversely affect women's self-esteem and confidence, but also forces female lawyers to work a great deal harder than the male counterparts to get to the same level. So now I want to talk about those inequalities and how those inequalities affect women in the profession in the context of COVID. Well, firstly, I think it was President Ward that addressed this issue of the importance of recognizing that social and economic inequalities have become even more apparent as a result of the pandemic, where the rule of law, gender equality, and human rights are even more at risk of being seriously undermined. The pandemic also threatens to undo some of the recent gains relating to gender equality. So I will now zoom into how this has impacted women in the profession, and then I would like to position COVID in the wider sort of gender equality context. And I will look very briefly at 4 aspects. 1, the legal profession, 2, employment, 3, representation, and 4, domestic violence. In terms of the legal profession, it appears at first glance that COVID has meant that there had been an increase of lawyers working from home, which has contributed to changing attitudes towards working from home. And that in itself has made a more manageable affair due to technology. People transitioning from fully office-based to regularly working from home has demonstrated that flexible working and agile working are possible. Remote working, if done correctly, has been shown to boost productivity, help companies attract top talent, and offer more options for clients to interact beyond the firm's office. However, it is important to establish boundaries between home and work, which has become more blurred, so a cautious approach is needed. Flexible working practices are of real significance for working parents to balance commitment at home, eliminating lengthy commutes and giving greater time management and control. And of course, the use of digital-based platforms underpins these benefits. So investing a lot in creating that digital platform is extremely important. But some of those positives need to be counterbalanced with the wider gender equality aspect that I was talking about at the beginning. So in terms of employment, the International Labour Organization reported that despite some progress over previous decades, gender gaps were still considerable and persistent in labour markets around the world. In low and lower middle income countries, women typically have lower social protection coverage. The International Labour Organization also reported that a large proportion of women work in sectors that are severely affected by the crisis. In terms of representation, in a recent policy brief published by the International Development Law Organization, it was reported that most healthcare workers are women, and many lack adequate protective personal equipment while working on the front lines of the pandemic. This is significant because these healthcare workers are more exposed and vulnerable to being affected by the disease. And yet, when we look at representation of women, in a recent rapid survey of 30 countries, most national level committees established to respond to COVID-19 do not have equal male-female representation, with women making up only 24% of the committees on average. And in terms of domestic violence, we all know that organizations like UNESCO, the OECD, the World Bank have tried to highlight what they call the hidden or the secret pandemic, which is domestic violence. The pandemic has highlighted that societies around the world have still a long way to go in terms of protecting women. The recent wave of domestic violence and violence against women was a sad reminder that gender equality is still aspirational. The pandemic has been an especially dangerous time for domestic abuse victims, with lockdown measures making it even more difficult to get time away from the perpetrator, leaving many trapped in an increasingly volatile situation. So in that context, how can law societies and law firms can help redress inequalities? In a joint Law Society Bakewell's international report that will be released in March of this year, we found that many respondents felt that their national law society or bar association could play a leading role in responding to the needs of women lawyers. However, many law societies do not take gender equality seriously, and many of them also lack women lawyers in leadership positions. Therefore, what is lacking is the political will to make a concerted, serious, and consistent effort to achieve gender equality. As a result, women lawyers do not feel represented by their law societies and have been compelled to form their own groups. There is also the need to have a more holistic approach to improving the profession. To increase representation, law societies and bar associations must show leadership, embrace gender equality, and respect for all their members. In other jurisdictions, women lawyers welcome the work of their national law society and saw this as a crucial aspect of support for women lawyers. For example, returning to work after maternity leave or a career break could be one of the biggest decisions a woman makes, and confidence can be a considerable part in the decision-making process. Law firms, law societies, bar associations can support returning women lawyers, creating workspaces that cater to women's needs, such as providing spaces for nursing mothers and childcare facilities. These provisions will make working mothers feel welcome and valued. It is also important to offer return to work courses, including mentoring and shadowing, which can be very helpful for receiving legislative updates, familiarizing with the workplace, among other benefits. From the Law Society, we continue to support women lawyers, both domestically and internationally. In fact, as a result of the Advocating for Change report, we are supporting other jurisdictions around the world with research projects to gather quantitative and qualitative data, which is the evidence that we need to continue building the business case for women in the profession. In addition, we continue to support women lawyers by running events that impact on women, as well as opening up discussions that before remained hidden. For example, helping women experiencing the menopause, trying to facilitate workshops on a wide variety of topics, including mental health. So to finalize, to conclude, one of the questions that we have been asking ourselves is, so what kind of leadership style is needed in this new context? And what best practices have emerged? So, and in that precise point, I would like to highlight that recent research that was released this month in January 2021 was published by the Center for Economic Policy Research and the World Economic Forum. And it was a joint research undertaken by the University of Liverpool and the University of Reading. The research is entitled "Leading the Fight Against the Pandemic, Does Gender Really Matter?" And this is an analysis of 194 countries from around the world. The research initially appears to show that COVID outcomes are systematically better in countries led by women. And to some extent, this may be explained by the proactive and coordinated policy responses adopted by female leaders. The researchers explained that the gender of leadership could well have been key in the current context, where attitudes to risk and empathy mattered, as did clear and decisive communications. There seems to be some evidence, therefore, that being risk-averse with respect to loss of life and having a clear, empathic, and decisive communication style made a significant difference to immediate outcomes of the COVID pandemics in women-led countries. The research highlighted that in almost all cases, the lockdown earlier than male leaders in similar circumstances may have in the short term may have had longer term economic implications, but it helped these countries to save life, as evidenced by the significantly lower number of deaths in these countries. And just to finalize, is in addition, with many leaders in the legal profession facing the stay-at-home challenges as their staff, some employers have learned to be more flexible, empathetic, and supportive of working families. And anecdotal evidence point to the fact that parents have learned to be increasingly unapologetic and straightforward about their childcare responsibility and childcare needs, which is also a relief for many women lawyers experiencing the double burden. Going forward, agile working and flexible working will be seen less of a female issue, and the working environment will just be a little bit more accommodating for women. So preserving this unexpected gain in the aftermath of the pandemic will be key. Thank you.
Merci à vous, Madame. Alors, je vois donc qu'à travers les interventions qui ont été faites, elles nous ont permis de répondre aux questions que je venais de poser avant, c'est-à-dire lors de la présentation. J'aimerais bien juste faire une petite remarque à Madame Lisette. Vous avez fait remarquer lors de votre intervention que vous avez organisé plusieurs tables rondes, mais j'espère que les prochaines tables rondes seront envisagées au nord d'Afrique, surtout que en nord d'Afrique, la Tunisie en l'occurrence, est connue pour son dispositif protecteur des droits de la femme, et ça peut être enrichissant pour les pays de l'Afrique, de un, et de deux, réajuster éventuellement les solutions pour améliorer la situation des femmes et remédier aux inégalités entre la femme et l'homme en général. Est-ce que vous envisagez une table ronde au niveau de l'Afrique du Nord, Madame Lisette, dans la perspective d'avenir, à court terme ou à moyen terme?
Thank you, Madame Messous, for your question, and I'm extremely grateful for the interest generated. If I am invited to North Africa, absolutely. The Law Society is committed to this agenda. We know that there have been a lot of interesting transformative elements in places like Tunisia. And in fact, I had the pleasure of meeting one of your ministers at one of the ministers from Tunisia. I think it was the family minister at the Commission on the Status of Women in New York last year. And the progress has been remarkable. But also there is a recognition that there are a lot of challenges. So absolutely, if we are invited, if we are approached, we will make the effort to be there. Thank you.
Merci, Madame. Merci. De toutes les manières, si la volonté est là, les solutions suivront, certainement.
Absolutely, Madame Messous. And what I say is that creating the law societies and bar associations are in the prime position to create methodologies like the round tables, so that those spaces allow women to discuss among women some of the key challenges, create strategies which can then allow them to establish a good and positive dialogue with the male counterparts. Male champions for change are important, but also allowing ourselves to reflect on the challenges and plan and for the actions that we want to take is also key for those transformative changes to happen. Thank you.
D'accord, merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup pour nos chers panélistes, excusez-moi. Alors, s'il y a des questions, donc je cède plutôt je cède s'il y a des questions qui pourraient être formulées, et qu'on pourrait demander aux panélistes avant que je donne la parole à Monsieur le Président ou éventuellement à Donald pour qu'on puisse clôturer la session. Je vois qu'il y a une question qui a été posée de Joseph qui va à Stéphane. Non, je vois non. Non, ça ne concerne pas nos pénalistes. Est-ce qu'il y a des questions qui ont été posées? Alors, peut-être que je reprends les questions que j'ai posées, peut-être pour les développer de façon plus ample. Tout à l'heure, j'ai posé la question de savoir les inégalités affectant les femmes dans la profession. Alors, je posais la question de savoir si les inégalités affectant les femmes dans la profession ont été exacerbées, excusez-moi, en raison de la pandémie du Covid. Alors, je pose cette question à toutes les panélistes. Parce que tout à l'heure, je crois que c'était le professeur qui parlait non, c'était Madame Jarpa qui a fait remarquer que les avocates, pour améliorer plutôt notre leadership, la femme avocate n'est pas censée exercer le métier forcément au barreau. Elle peut être orientée mieux vers la gestion du bureau. Alors, est-ce que vous pouvez développer mieux cette question? Comment est-ce que… Je crois que cette question a été abordée par Madame Jarpa. Est-ce que vous m'entendez? Si je ne me trompe pas, c'est vous qui avez fait remarquer tout à l'heure que pour améliorer notre leadership, la femme n'est pas censée exercer forcément la profession juridique au niveau du barreau, mais qu'elle peut se contenter seulement de la gestion du bureau. Est-ce que vous pouvez développer mieux? Est-ce que vous pouvez revenir sur cette question, Madame Jarpa? C'est vous, je crois, qui avez posé cette question.
All right, thank you, Ms. Fati. I hope you all can hear me well. So regarding the issue of women in leadership, there are a couple of things or ways in which we can look at it. One is the transformation of the institutional or professional cultures. And I use the word cultures because we have different cultures within different countries, within different law firms. So there's a need to change these institutional cultures and norms or practices that have tended historically to believe that women cannot be leaders. And I always point out when I'm talking from the African perspective, that it's important to look back at the African historical systems. The traditional African systems allowed women in most spaces to have leadership roles vis-a-vis men. Within the African systems, we find that women went to war, they fought in wars, and women were leaders within spiritual spaces, which we often see within other spaces as something reserved for men. I make this historical connection to show that when we're talking about women in leadership, for those who will be quick to resist, that we need to realize that this is something that is indigenous to African systems, and it's not being imported from some Western or esoteric place. So how can we therefore change these leadership norms? One, look at the historical perspective of women's roles in leadership. Two, begin to have conversations, which Ms. Lizette talked about, the roundtable discussions, the panel discussions like we're doing now, that will challenge the received gender or regendered norms about women in leadership. Three is to also have conversations among the bar associations about leadership that is open and inclusive of women, allowing women's voices to be heard. Knowing that it is not about no women at the bar, it's about a system or a profession that would feed into the needs of all. Because as we've noted, women do have different perspectives. And if women do indeed hold half of the sky, then we are better off allowing them and giving them the opportunity to hold it fully so that we can all benefit. Because if that sky falls, it falls on all of us. Lastly, I also want to mention that this is sometimes from a feminist or woman perspective may not go very well with people, and then this is not a blame on women, but that we as women also need to re-engineer our thinking about leadership. For example, Miss Fiona Wall, she's gone into a leadership position. Many others have done it before her, and therefore we hope that many others will do it after her. So we women also need to take up our rightful leadership positions, look for mentors, and as we said, men are mentors, women are mentors, and let's build networks between the different gender norms so that we can have a leadership culture that is inclusive for all and by all.
Merci, madame. Il y a une autre question auquel j'aimerais bien attirer votre attention. Vous avez parlé de l'harcèlement sexuel au travail. Dans quelle mesure la femme peut participer, bien sûr je parle de votre pays, pour changer le arsenal juridique et qui réprime ces pratiques? Parce qu'en Tunisie, je reviens encore une fois pour le dispositif juridique tunisien, le harcèlement sexuel au travail maintenant est réprimé.
If I may say something, can you hear me? This is Fiona.
Oui. Oui.
Okay. So just to add a little on what Professor said about redefining roles, I have seen in other countries, I've seen women's roles redefined where you find that I think I've had this story from two law firms, one in Uganda and one in Kenya. They were failing in management. They were very good in practice and litigation, and the numbers were coming in but they had a huge turnover, staff turnover. They had problems in their HR, and yet they had a lawyer, a female lawyer within their institute, within their firms, both firms, that was very strong on HR and other governance issues. So they transformed her role into CEO. And now we see that as firms embrace the core competences of women lawyers, they also morph and transform into more productive firms and probably more sustainable ones. The other thing that, but then speaking about sexual harassment, that the problem with, we have a lot of laws in Uganda, for instance, that criminalize certain aspects of sexual harassment, our penal code and some of the other laws. However, because this issue has been frowned upon, I can give live examples. We had a member of PALU, we had a minister who was being sexually harassed through social media by a young man, and then, you know, the young man was prosecuted, and then there's this whole Twitter bullying of the victim shaming, and the minister withdrew charges, and this was dropped. That sets a very bad example. So we have a lot of these things within. So the law might exist, but how sexual offenses are prosecuted, how the victims are interviewed and treated when they're looking for redress. We had an issue where one of our state prosecutors accused one of her bosses of sexual harassment. And one of the things that came out is that, first of all, there was such a backlash on her just for reporting it. They talked about how she reported it late, how nobody really seemed to want to know the details. Again, our culture frowns on such things being spoken about. So the victim shaming around sexual harassment has actually caused a lot of it to be buried in the workplace. We have prominent lawyers who have confessed to abuse and to standing abusive relationships because they did not know whether they could speak out and still survive in their careers. So we have those unconscious biases that create such a problem around women seeking redress in sexual harassment issues. I think that's a bigger problem than the question of do we have laws. Sorry, just a little example. The sexual offences bill that we want passed will register sexual offenders. Right now in the education sector, we have a lot of sexual harassment of students, and the headmaster leaves one school and goes to the other because there's no registration of sexual offenders. So I think these are some of the things we can work into and work towards.
Yeah, can I just add as well 3 points. Firstly, I would like to say that it is important that every time we hear a justification for preserving gender equality or cultural social norms, we should basically eliminate that myth. Culture and social norms evolve with times, and they do not remain static, and therefore they should not be used as a justification to preserve gender inequality. The second is that the myth that gender equality is a thing just for women. In fact, there have been many research that point out to the fact that if there is greater gender equality between men and women, it can benefit them both in terms of mental health, but also in terms of economic and finances. And third, and most importantly, I echo the comments from Professor Dawuni and President Wall about the sexual harassment element. There are many jurisdictions where there are laws that one can access, but they are usually underfunded or not enforced properly. And we need to concentrate on the changes in mindset, because many women, even in the legal profession says that there is such a stigma to openly talk about sexual harassment, let alone reporting it. And when we talk about sexual harassment, we need to consider that it is also about the power relations between them, where women tend to have not to be in the powerful position. So changes in mindsets are imperative. Thank you.
Madam Fatia, do you have a minute for me to respond?
Oui, allez-y.
Very quickly.
Brièvement, parce que j'aimerais bien rebondir sur ce qu'elle a dit, Madame Lisette, très brièvement. Allez-y, je vous cède la parole.
All right. Okay. I just want to respond to 2 quick comments in the chat box, which is very important. That the 2 presenters have talked about the fact that women also have to come out of their shells and women have to support each other. And that is true. I think we've heard from Ms. and Ms. Wall that we should be mindful not to think that all men are against gender equality. There are some strong gender feminist men who have been fighting for women's rights and continue to do that. So it is indeed important for us to build on those allyships and those bridges. And we also have to recognize the fact that women may also be holding ourselves back sometimes, some women. And therefore that discussion also needs to come across women, which goes back to Ms. Lizette's point. We need to do a re-socialization of our own minds, of our leadership roles, knowing that once again, it's not a blame on women, but that the social, historical context within which they also grew up. And so there's a lot of discussion that needs to be done, and how we can work collectively is very important.
Merci, professeur. J'ai beaucoup aimé votre expression. Il faut que les femmes sortent de leur cocon. Et effectivement, c'est ce que j'allais dire. Parce que les femmes, quand elles dénoncent l'harcèlement sexuel, elles se sentent accusées, elles se sentent, elles sont offensées. Il y a des réactions négatives vis-à-vis d'elles, généralement. Mais encore, je reviens au cas de la Tunisie, il y a des associations de soutien de femmes, comme l'association des femmes démocrates. C'est à nous de créer les cellules de soutien. Et puis, c'est vrai que, comme disait le professeur, il faut faire la part des choses. Les hommes ne sont pas nos rivaux, ne sont pas nos ennemis. S'il y a égalité, on parle d'égalité, mais chacun, normalement, assume sa part de féminité ou de masculinité. Parce que la femme, il y a des choses que la femme ne peut pas assumer. Il n'y a pas de rivalité, à vrai dire, entre les hommes et les femmes. Il y a des hommes, c'est vrai, qui soutiennent la femme. Il faut faire la part des choses. Il ne faut pas généraliser. Donc, ça, c'est un point important que le professeur a fait remarquer. Je crois que nous sommes arrivés à la fin de notre session. Et je me dois de vous remercier de nouveau pour vos interventions très riches et très diversifiées. Je crois que toutes les questions que j'ai soulevées, donc vous avez répondu à toutes ces questions qui ont été soulevées. Il reste toujours, bien entendu, d'autres défis pour la femme à relever. J'espère que nous aurions d'autres occasions pour discuter de ces défis, et que ce soit dans le cadre donc, de notre organisation ou autre, parce que maintenant, grâce au Covid, il n'y a plus de limite. On peut communiquer à travers le monde, et c'est ça peut-être la faveur ou les avantages, un des avantages du Covid, qui nous a permis de communiquer sans forcément nous déplacer par la technologie de Zoom. Voilà, donc merci encore une fois. J'espère vous revoir demain. Donc nous continuerons notre conférence demain et après-demain, toujours à la même heure, à partir de 14h, heure de Nairobi. Merci et à très bientôt et à demain.
Thank you very much, Vice President Fatia Hedili Messouz. I thank the President, the PALU President, Chief Emeka Obegulu, for kicking us off so nicely and steering us superbly. And I thank you, VP Fatia, our VP for North Africa, joining us today from Tunis, Tunisia, for chairing this second session so superbly as well, and so cerebrally. I pass again the apologies of our Secretary General, Kari Abdul Bagi, who couldn't join us from Cameroon due to internet challenges. We are at the end of day one. I'm quite happy with it. The first session, in my view, brought out the importance of training and capacity building for legal practitioners and also for lawyers in training. Lawyers in training in ICTs, in information and communications technologies, so that we can more nimbly use a range of technologies and a range of facilities. But also training in ICT law, the law of information and communication technologies, because lots of legal issues are arising as we use them, some of which came out in that session. So on our part as PALU, we will continue to work with our partners on these issues to play our part, especially in capacity building of our members, but also enabling our members to get together to engage in advocacy. Lawyers Hub, we know is our technical partner, is actually a hub for matters of the interface between technology and law. So you'll get artists, you'll get IT engineers, you'll get designers, you'll get lawyers, all working together to improve that environment. Among other things, it's initiated and hosts the Africa Law Tech Association, which we established last year. So we'd encourage people who are interested in this area to join. Something else Law Africa did is Lawyers Hub did is they innovated something they're calling legal hackathons, where they get groups of lawyers working together in real time to generate a law. So at the beginning of COVID-19, when there was a gap in how our states, could come up with laws, policies, and so on, they got us in groups working across countries, looking at if law is needed, what should a good bill look like? And in many cases, over 24 hours, many people pitching in from different corners were able to come up with a very good bill, which you can then take to the Attorney General or the Minister of Justice and say, if you want to pass law in this area, here's a good lay bill, a good draft bill. So innovations that we could do. Law Trailer, which is co-sponsoring tomorrow's session on law tech and continuing legal education, has a specific platform for training for CLA online, and actually has a range of courses for ICT and law. And actually one of the offers that it made to PALU members is that it is offering free coupons to any participant that registers for this conference to get that training free. So both of them, both Lawyers Hub and Law Trailer, will be speaking in session 4 tomorrow, the second session of tomorrow. So please join us to learn more about this, about what they do, about the training opportunities that are there, and for you who've registered for this conference to get the free coupons. At that session, we as PALU will also be displaying the new membership engagement system that we've been developing during COVID-19. One that will enable you to be able to find PALU online, join PALU online, choose the committees of your interest online, pay for your membership online, and be able to associate with like-minded people, like-minded members in committees online, all of our membership engagement system. And right now it's available on computers and tablets. And we are working such that hopefully in another couple of weeks, it will also be an app downloadable from the App Store, from Play Store, and you can use on your phone. I like something else that a few members of our ICT committee, including Linda Bonyo, who's the CEO of Lawyers Hub, but also Ephraim Percy Kanyanuto brought out in the chat, the importance of telling our own data stories and data-driven legal practice. So we'll see how to take this forward. I liked also the second session. The second session brought out again the importance, and the prof was very good for this, the importance of data-driven discourse and that data exists, and that empirical research is being done, which can be expanded, both quantitative research and qualitative research. It also brought up that innovations exist. For instance, legislative innovations, policy innovations. President Fiona Nabasa-Wall gave us the example of the gender balance certificate that was legislated in the Parliament of Uganda. In terms of the AU, again, and Professor Downey referred to it, and it will come up again in tomorrow's session. The fact that the reason why, for the first time in our history, we've got very good representation at the level of elected judges, men and women, at the African Court on Human and People's Rights, is because of strong policy at the level of AU that goes through the entire process, from seeking nominations to shortlisting to holding elections, and to forcing states that when they're electing, they must elect men and women. So there are 11 judges in the court. There are 5 regions in Africa. By and large, each region gets 2 judges, and then there's 1 floating judge. So the law now is very clear that if one judge is a man, the other has to be a woman the next time a vacancy comes. Or if one judge is a woman, the next has to be a man, and so on. So, and this policy did not come out of nowhere. It came out of years of advocacy by our colleagues who engage in advocacy on gender equality and women's empowerment. People like GMAC, the Gender is My Agenda campaign at the African Union, people like FEMNET, the African Women's Communications and Development Network, people like FAS, Femmes Africa Solidarité, African Women's Solidarity in its French acronym. So I would also urge you to take time to visit the website of our sister institution, the Institute for African Women in Law. I'm very glad that they have agreed to be our key partner to help us as PALU also, as we partner, improve on our research, on our documentation, on our advocacy, and on having the evidence base. PALU itself has a Women Lawyers Forum since 2016, and with partnerships like this, we can strengthen so that beyond being a place for networking and building each other and so on, we also get some hard advocacy work done. One of the participants in the chat complained that, but women do not support women candidates when they stand. I won't say which participant or whether they are male or female, but I'll just say that it is my honest conviction as Donald Omondi Deya, but it is also the policy of the AU and the policy of PALU, that gender equality is both a men's and women's issue. It is not the work of women alone to vote for women candidates. It is the work of both men and women to encourage good female candidates to run, to help campaign for them, to protect them from unfair attacks, and to vote for them so that there's diversity in our leadership. As PALU, we try to practice what we call a 3G policy: diversity on gender, generational, and geographical planes. So always have young and old, male and female, and reflect the face of Africa: north, south, east, west, center, and where possible, our 6th regional diaspora. And whenever we get it wrong, we apologize. We do not make excuses and say they didn't turn up, and so we apologize and we promise to do it better. So ladies and gentlemen, tomorrow we'll have 2 sessions. The first one will be on gender mainstreaming at regional courts and tribunals in Africa. And the second will be the legal tech session, which I've spoken a lot about. For the gender mainstreaming session, please just note that we're not talking of just getting good judges, male and female. We're talking about all the court users, the entire court ecosystem. How is it in terms of numbers of judges, whether elected or appointed? How is it in terms of the registry staff, and when it's a criminal court, the prosecution staff and other staff? How is it for practicing counsel in those courts, women and men, because practicing counsel form the bulk of our members, not only ones? How is it for litigants, people who go to use the courts, and court users generally? So I think it'll be quite interesting. And again, we'll be looking at innovations. We'll be looking for where mentorships can come from. We'll be looking for how partnerships can be done to do work together and so on. Then we'll have the legal tech session. And then when we finish, we'll have an informal networking night, the privacy quiz night. So please join us again tomorrow, same time. I wouldn't say same place. If you want to join us from a different place, so long as you join us, that is fine. But I will, and my team will join you from our secretariat. And I don't think any of my board members are traveling this week. They'll probably still join you from their usual seats. Have a good evening and thank you for your time.
Merci, Donald. Ciao. Au revoir. Thank you. Ciao.